the week. We have 9 problems, and the midterms are one of them. And that's even according to his own advisors and allies. I'm going to show you some of the new numbers, including a special look at why both parties agree on one thing. If the elections were held tonight, Democrats would be in the lead position to retake power. So on the one hand, 99 days is still an eternity in politics. But on the other hand, both parties, their candidates, even some Trump advisors, are absorbing that reality and reacting. Now we begin, though, with the related fact that Donald Trump continues to bleed support from his own base. This is different, I'll just tell you, from the midterm projections, because that has to do with who will actually turn out and what else will happen, and we're going to get to that with some very special guests tonight. But our lead story is the toxic combination of Donald Trump's ongoing governing problems. The high prices he hasn't stemmed, an Epstein scandal that won't go away even with Republicans controlling subpoena power, and now a war that continues long after Donald Trump said it would be done. Here's the new polling. Majorities disapprove of Trump's handling of many top issues, 65% on this economy, a higher 71% when you ask just about the high prices and inflation that he has not only failed to stem, but the war has, of course, noticeably exacerbated. And then the war itself, that is, the policy, not just how it's affecting your gas prices and pocketbook, another 63% disapproving there. MS Now has reporting with sources saying that Trump's own advisors have basically conceded that things are so bad they must, or at least are, allowing Republican candidates to distance themselves from Trump. An operative saying you're not going to have candidates running out to defend the president's handling of the economy or the war. Republican insiders nervous about what some call a downright scary enthusiasm gap, with conservatives just not excited to turn out for Donald Trump. That's Washington Post reporting. The apathy reaching deep into the Republicans' base, spreading the party's, quote, most consistent voters. Now, this is a real thing. If you've been watching our coverage here in the summer, which is a time period where sometimes people understandably take a break from politics or news or look away, I have shared a point that was as true last week as is true this week as we start a new political week. There are certain things that Donald Trump can spin. Lord knows that he has had success telling his voters and his base all sorts of spin, myths, sometimes outright lies about things, and they seem to kind of go along with it. And then there are things over in reality. Obviously, I just showed you some, the reaction to the gas prices and the inflation. Another Mideast forever war, which he promised he wouldn't start. And in the reality side of the equation, it's much harder for Trump to just lie his way through. And so take some groups that have been predisposed to give Trump a chance and like some of the things he said to them. Even they, like young male conservative leaning voters, are turning away. And you don't just have to look at the polling I mentioned or our report at night. This is a reality issue that's gotten to the point that they talk about openly over on Fox, where Tomi Lahren said young men are turning on MAGA and Trump.
I think you're going to see, especially maybe some young men who are frustrated that things are costing a lot. Maybe they can't get a high-paying job. Again, there's a lot of issues that Republicans have yet to address. I think that they can, but you have to answer something with something. You can't answer something with nothing. And you're going to see a lot of people that are not happy with the status quo.
That's how it sounds over there, this disconnect. Politico also reporting that a quarter of people who voted for Trump believe the working class got substantial breaks from Trump's tax law, which Politico writes that signals how low public opinion is of the bill among his own base. That's to say nothing of the independent economists who warned about the cost and the deficit, or liberals, progressives, labor households, and others who say it just continues to widen the Wall Street gap at a time when people need real support. Another poll found, I should say, that about a fifth of Republicans, 18%, say they're just financially worse off since Trump returned to office. Now, that may sound like a small portion, but if that fifth of Republicans doesn't want to vote for more of this, more of the same, well, that's a huge midterm problem. Another humiliation coming out of that White House Correspondents' Dinner where Trump gave his big speech. We're not going to show you much of that, but then he also had to sit through and watch as Wall Street Journal reporters were feted and awarded for their past independent, no-holds-barred journalism and coverage of the Epstein scandal, including the links to Trump. The footage you have here is how the president had to sit through that, all dressed up, all ready to have his big night, and then Either he or his aides didn't get around to figuring out that this moment was coming, as he tried to kind of laugh off and shrug off the fact that he was sitting through listening to awards for the journalists who covered and documented that Trump signed this letter to Epstein for his birthday. That reporting was part of the onslaught that led to the release and the pressure of the Epstein files. I can mention that Donald Trump has vociferously denied being the author of that letter. They even sued the Journal over it, but the award and the legal status thus far has fallen much more on the verified side of the Journal's reporting and not the president's denial of his links and apparent praise of Epstein on his birthday. I want to bring in Jason Johnson, politics professor with Morgan State University, MSL political analyst, as we start the week. Welcome back.
Good to be here, Ari.
Great to have you. I mentioned this gap because the reality seems to keep catching up with him. And even over the weekend in that sort of event, he had his agenda, the speech that we didn't find super newsworthy, so we're not playing much of it here on this program. But he still had to sit through, again, reality. The Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, winning in court thus far to vindicate their reporting about him and Epstein. Your view on the reality of all this?
Well, the reality of all this is that, whatever metaphor you want to use, Donald Trump is not as popular as he once was. He's not able to bring back the old hits. He's not able to intimidate people, either in the press or in politics or even voters the way that he used to. He's not coming back for some big reunion tour over the summer. So him having to sit there and not only hear people report on his misdeeds and his association with misdeeds and get awarded for it, but also having his own party members not back him up and not stand for him is an indicator of how weakened he is with only 99 days before the election.
99, as you know, special number to many of us. I want to put up more of this Fox polling, Jason, because you really see where the preferences fall. And this is not the automatic for the Democrats. They had struggled in 24 to get out their message on some of these issues. So when you see the trust going towards the Dems, or perhaps you can tell us if you think it's also a rejection of Trump, but inequality, a 20-plus edge, healthcare, inflation, a 10 edge, the economy, if you just say it writ large, it starts to shrink a little bit. Trump has had people who think that he's a businessman on that. Foreign policy, if you ask it that way, it kind of doesn't bring up the war, +7. And then you get to the areas where security and crime, Trump is holding, but holding an edge that's far less than he used to have. What do you see in these current numbers from Fox?
What I see is Donald Trump's inability to continue communicating with voters. Remember, we've talked about this already for several months. To continue with the metaphor, whenever Trump is asked about the economy, whenever he's talked about gas prices or inflation, he's basically saying, hey, if you're having gas problems, I feel bad for you, son, because he doesn't really care. You look at what happened this weekend. After giving a speech where, again, he doesn't get a lot of laughs, the White House correspondence doesn't get a tremendous amount of attention, what is he doing today? He's posting Rick and Morty memes on his social media, right? This is someone who has lost their ability to deliver messages to voters. And when that happens, people are just going to vote and they're going to do polls based on their lived experience. And their lived experience is completely separate from what they're hearing from the Republican Party, and Donald Trump can no longer control the narrative.
Rick and Morty, a great cartoon, but in the world of that cartoon, as well as its creator, Dan Harmon, is pretty critical of Trump, greed, right-wing excess. I mean, it's not a political cartoon in its frame, but it's just funny. He's not exactly reaching for a Kid Rock meme. It's the problem he's had with a lot of other creatives and artists, where he tries to say, oh, maybe I'm cool like them, and I want to be in that conversation. Just like with FIFA and soccer, and then he's tempting them to punch back. We'll watch for that, but it brings me to the next thing I wanted to show you, which is Larry Kudlow is a longtime economic political. He worked for Trump. Talking about the charisma or riz, as they say, that's lacking. Here's what he observes.
Call it swag, swagger, riz, aura, or just plain messaging, but the GOP doesn't have it. You're bundling everything. Nothing is getting done. Your messaging is non-existent. You've lost your swag, your swagger, your riz, or whatever the young people say. No one knows what the heck you're doing, sir. They have no idea.
Jason?
And that's Larry Kudlow. And here's the thing, Art. I went in preparation for tonight. I went back and actually looked at the Republican Party platform from 2024. Right there in the first opening section, it talks about how wars are a bad idea. Trump was going to end unnecessary wars because wars lead to inflation. In their own words, the Republicans are not following their own party platform. So it's one thing if your leadership is a little bit off. Let Trump be Trump has been their attitude for 15 years now. But they can't even go back to what they put down in pen and paper in order to demonstrate to the people that they know what they're doing. It's common to have legislation sort of slow down during a campaign year, but it's completely different to have a Congress that can do nothing. They can't pass anything because when they try, Trump undermines it. They can't pass anything because when they try and sell it, Trump undermines it. This is a party in disarray. Regardless of what the New York Times wants to say about Democrats, the Republicans are the party in disarray 99 days out.
Jason Johnson, good to have you lead us off. Thank you very much, sir. I'll tell folks what's coming up. We look at the details on that road to the midterms, and we have special guests on that and new reporting on the jet corruption. And by the end of the hour, we start the week here with your update on all the news and politics. But then we will get out to media mogul Byron Allen is making his Beat debut. Interesting guy. We'll hear from him tonight, and I'll be back with you in 90 seconds. 99 days until the midterms, Democrats are hitting affordability. Democratic leader Jeffries was campaigning in Pennsylvania. This was just yesterday, contrasting what he says Trump's priorities for the country are with the financial struggles of most American people.
MAGA Republicans can find money for Donald Trump's reckless war of choice in Iran. They can find money for his king-like ballroom. They can find money to unleash ICE brutality on American citizens and law-abiding immigrant families. But when it comes to making your life more affordable, the cookie jar is empty.
That's the Democrats' message. You'll know it sort of sweeps up what's worked in some of these earlier races, including Mayor Mamdani's affordability push in New York, and tries to make it very clear it is anti-Trump, but it's not obsessed with Trump, his personality, his attacks on the rule of law and democracy, all important issues that Democrats have hit before. This is laser focused on how it's too expensive to live in Trump's America, and voters, some of them seem to agree.
People are feeling the impact. Maybe they don't understand NATO, but they know their gas prices are high. They know that they're having trouble paying for things, so that affects them.
Voters have a clear idea of how we got here. Half of the public sees the gas prices as, at this point, financial hardship. A whopping 78% says the Trump administration just isn't focused on lowering prices, meaning they've paid attention and the public overwhelmingly, including Republicans, just doesn't think this is what he cares about. Now, Trump has demanded loyalty, but as I mentioned, this is new reporting that he is really changing it up, and this is a sign of perhaps weakness or flexibility, whatever word you want to use. The reporting is that the sort of Republican mothership is saying, yes, if candidates need to distance themselves from Trump and his policies to try to eke out a victory in these midterms, they can do it. Now, is that too little too late? Well, take a listen. In Maine, a state that has been in the bullseye for Democrats precisely because Susan Collins has proven to be much more conservative and MAGA-friendly and pro-life than she ran on. We've been reporting on that. It's a must-win state, really, and here's what we're hearing out there.
Susan Collins has voted with Donald Trump 96% of the time. She stood with Donald Trump. She stood with ICE.
My 83-year-old neighbor has voted for Susan Collins her entire career. He said to me 2 days ago, he said, I'm done with her. She's too much in Trump's back pocket.
So that is what this election is about.
Our real-time payments accelerate liquidity and deliver funds instantly.
If Susan Collins were voting as independently as she did earlier in her career, we checked, and at one point it was about 60% with her party and 40% against, then she might have an accurate or logical message to those voters. Hey, you could stick with her and still be against Trump. But she, like so much of the MAGA-fied Republican Party, can't land that as a true message with any voters who've been paying attention. And that's why these midterms are harder for the Republicans. Because while Trump did stage a big comeback in 24, and his numbers were higher and people wanted to run with him, he has completely squandered that political capital, that support, and that polling in a rush. I mean, very quickly in the beginning of his second term. And that means a midterm that becomes a referendum on him is bad news for the Republicans. And we've got two special guests on these latest numbers when we come back. 9 days to the midterms, we're joined by our special guest that we booked just for this countdown segment. John Della Volpe is Director of Polling at Harvard's Institute of Politics and MS Now contributor, and Linda Killian, historian and journalist, the author of The Swing Vote, The Untapped Power of Independence, who has come to us with both an independent perspective and an expertise on those independents who can matter so much. Welcome to both of you. John, what do you see as the state of play here 99 days out?
So, a few things, Ari. I know you talked earlier about the generic ballot. I'm not sure that's the story. As good as the generic ballot looks today for Democrats, +5, +7, +14, I think, with independents. Linda can fill us in on that. But Democrats are also leading among important groups like younger voters, like women, about tied with men. But I think the bigger dynamic is this is an election based on people's experiences, okay? Just like there was in 2024. And their experience is obviously driven by the lack of affordability, prices in the grocery store and gas, healthcare, and of course, housing. More important, I think, is a concern that 2/3, according to several recent polls, show that the economy in this system is rigged. But when you dig one step deeper and you ask which party is more aligned with the elites right now, the party that was supposed to be for the working class person in 2024, which is the Republican Party, is seen as significantly more aligned with the elites today than Democrats. And I think that is the key to this election. Democrats are in a strong position right now, and I think they could potentially be even stronger as the message moves from Washington, D.C. to the individual states that are part of the battleground.
Yeah, and that populism is something that both parties have fought over. I mean, Trump was trying to hit a different message in 24, aware apparently of those feelings, and now has sort of lost the traction there. One more quote for you, John, and then we'll bring Linda in. But on your point, I'm reading here from reporting where Republicans are scared. Here's a former Trump voter who says, "We voted for Trump, and he did the opposite of what he said he was going to do." This is Lance Salentic, a 56-year-old retiree who spoke to the Post. Gas prices were going to be $2. Food was going to be cheaper. Energy prices were going to be in half. We were going to get 2 rebate checks to the American people. We weren't going to have any new wars. It goes on to say, we were going to build a wall and deport 30 million illegal aliens. And then referring to Trump, he did none of it. Salentic telling the Post he'd either sit out this year's election or vote for Democrats. John, I picked that quote because it shows a person who listened to Trump, who can tick off the campaign promises, remembers them, and apparently has a report card that he's 0 for 5. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, listen, Ari, I talk and listen to regular voters every single night of the week. I hear that time and time again. The coalition is narrowing by the day. I'll give you one other sad story I heard just last week. There's a former Army veteran who hurt himself in his family restaurant, had to get stitches. Right? He told me he had to choose between getting anesthesia and his rent because Donald Trump promised more affordability, promised he'd have more opportunity, instead had to, what he said, raw dog the stitches, which cost $800, and had rather than foregoing rent. These are the choices that millions of Americans are making, and they tie it back to the failed promises of Donald Trump. A lot of people voted outside of their political values because they thought he'd deliver on some of these things. And that's what I think the story of this election so far.
Linda?
Well, I assume you want me to talk about independents and where they stand in terms of this election. And I wanted to say the number of independents are creeping up. Gallup in January had the number at 45%. A CNN poll last month says 47% of voters say they are either independent or have no party affiliation. That's the largest voting group in the country and is almost the combined total of Republicans and Democrats. In 10 states, independents are the largest group of voters, including Arizona, Nevada, and North Carolina. So these are important swing states. Now, what will they do in the election? Joe Manchin, a former Democratic senator from West Virginia, just last week announced he's creating something called the Independent Leadership Council, along with his daughter Heather, to support independent candidates around the country. Now, it's late in the game to recruit, train, and support independent candidates, but there are already some running for the U.S. Senate in Montana, Idaho, and Nebraska, and for governor of Maine. And Maine, like you mentioned Maine, it's a super important state this time. Like Alaska, it has ranked choice voting, which makes it easier for independent candidates to succeed. And Angus King is an independent, so they're used to voting for independents. But young people and independents have an extremely negative view of both political parties. According to a recent Pew poll, Democrats have a 13% advantage with independent voters over Republicans, and independents think the Republican Party is too extreme. But they're also undecided, and they aren't sold on the Democrats. The Democrats have to close the deal. And just like those disaffected Republicans that you were talking about, it's a much harder sell to vote for Democrats than to just stay home. Probably a lot of those Republican voters will just stay home. The independents don't turn out in the midterms like the core party voters do. So they have to be excited to turn out.
And Linda, what do you see with younger people, either who could be independents or are just a little more up for grabs and sporadic? Because we heard so much about younger men and Trump's advances there, and some of the new polling suggests they're lapsed MAGA or they're just not feeling it. To Linda.
Yeah, that's right. The MAGA young men may stay home. Or they might, I don't know, Maine is a great example. You talked about Maine and Susan Collins. There's been a lot of disarray up there. They had the candidate Graham Plattner, and he withdrew after allegations of sexual assault. He was considered, I don't know, sort of a macho guy that would appeal to those kind of voters. On Saturday, Maine Democrats picked Troy Jackson, an economic populist from northern Maine who worked on Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. He will challenge Collins. He may appeal to those kind of voters. He has sort of a working class demeanor. He's from northern Maine. And Trump has never been popular in Maine. Collins has hung on, but Trump has never carried Maine in 3 presidential elections.
Yeah, John?
I think your point about younger people is important. Younger people, I think, I study them at the Institute of Politics, are the key to this election. They were the key to Trump's failure in the 2018 midterms, where 75% of young people who voted supported House Democrats. Okay, I don't think it's going to be that hot in this, and we had record turnout among younger people. Twice as many young people voted in the 2008 midterm as in any midterm in the previous 40 years. Okay, so I don't see that historic level of participation, but that's the difference, I think, between a good and a great night for Democrats. It's essentially a toss-up, Ari, among Gen Xers and baby boomers. Okay. And it's a 10, 15-point lead among Gen Zers and millennials. And the degree to which they're enthusiastic, they feel some agency, that their vote can matter, that could be the tipping point in a lot of these battleground states.